All right. How's everybody doing? Good. What's a bird guy doing here at a regenerative conference with a bunch of herbivore lovers? Well, there's multiple parts to the puzzle, isn't there? Well, as Ann just so nicely introduced, I'm Dave Shields. I'm with Pasture Life Farms in O'Brien, Florida. Small zip code, we're in north central Florida. I have a previous life in IT. I'm a first generational farmer. And this year, the third generation was born on my farm. So that was really a cool thing, actually. And so it's amazing how quick life can change, especially when you're doing something so far from it. But in any case, I would like to take an opportunity to discuss the ultimate multi-level marketing opportunity, the best that you've ever had, better than Amway, better than Monavie, Herbalife, multi-speciation. We've talked a lot about herbivores on pasture, and have you been to a pasture where they don't use wormers, where there's not a bird with those herbivores? And so I think there's a natural relationship there. And that relationship, I think, is something that I would like to talk to you guys about. But there's so many aspects to pastured poultry. Where do you start? There's meat birds, turkeys, ducks, layers. Well, what would be the easiest thing for a bunch of ranchers or farmers to get into that's not too cumbersome and too difficult? I thought layers would be a great conversation for today. I normally address a bunch of poultry nerds at a conference called APA, American Pastured Poultry Producers Association. Do we have anybody here from APA? Okay, a couple. All right, APA has been around for a while, and it's a program in a wonderful group that I've been a member of for quite some time, and I've donated a lot of my time, and my wife has donated 6 years of her time as a board member, and we've worked on many projects. And that dovetails into why I'm in here now. My wife, Ginger, worked with Carrie over at AGA to come up with the pasture poultry standards that AGA is rolling out for third-party verification, which is something I think you all should really think about if you're going to be doing something with pasture poultry. So back to layers. Layers are a great way to start just because the requirements are pretty minimum. Processing, when I say processing, I'm not talking about, processing the bird, but, the eggs. The product of the egg is very marketable. Everybody wants eggs. There's a lot of interest, especially in pasture eggs. I don't know if you watched egg prices in the store right now, but they're pretty high. I mean, you could sell eggs, especially off a pasture farm, for a great price. The infrastructure needs for a pasture poultry operation are pretty minimal, especially when you get into layers. And then how would you like people to pay you for nutrient inputs for your farm? I mean, that to me is one of the big things that I got into pasture poultry for, is I wanted a way to turbocharge the nutrient cycle of my farm. I farm in a sand ridge in Florida. I have 40 feet of sand until I hit any type of difference in my terrain. And that's a very difficult environment to work in, especially if you're trying to grow grass and nutrient forages. But I knew that something like pastured poultry would be a great way to introduce those nutrients at a controlled, managed level to be able to increase my ability, my forage, and my load capacity for the herbivores that are on our farm. Definitely, unless you plan to spend a lot of time on a mower, make sure you have something to eat the byproduct of what your poultry will produce for you. So layers can be easy until they're not easy. They can be highly profitable, and then all of a sudden they're not highly profitable. Over the years, we have worked with layers, and I've banged my head against the walls. You can have this great flock, and then like the next month, your lay rates are terrible and you're losing money. So a lot of that's because I was green at it, and I didn't know much about what I was doing. But again, I'm an IT guy just trying to figure this out, right? I was there. The reason why I got into this is because I needed to change for my family. When you have 6 kids, you think about things, health. Jonathan's talk was really important to me, listening to what he had to say, because health was the reason. That was what I wanted. Doing layers half-cocked will get you nowhere. Having a goal is super important. What do you want to accomplish with them? With any animal on your farm, you shouldn't just put them on your farm because you want them there. You need to have a goal for that animal. And what is that goal? Well, good news is you're here listening to me talk about this. So hopefully, as you guys leave the conference today, this will give you a little something to think about for later on. So what can you do with layers? You know, there's so many things and so many benefits to layers. You know, if you have a retail sales base that you already work with, obviously an awesome product. Fertility, if you need nutrients on your farm, if you're farming a beach like me in Florida, nutrients are really important, especially when you have 30-inch downpours in a month. I mean, we get nutrients washed out of our soil quickly. So it's like we're constantly fighting this. But we are building organic matter, or slowly it's getting better every year. Pasture sanitation. I mean, again, if you have large herds, you can move layers behind herds. They're great for working through pastures after cattle. We use that. We have dairy cows on our farm. So for me, it's perfect. We use them right behind the dairy cows. We like to bring them in there when the grasses are the right length. You know, layers like tender growth. They don't like big, tall, bushy grass they get lost into. They can't really do anything with that. But they do like shorter grass, stubbly graft, you know, nice tender growth. Eye candy. Yep, this is a reason. Sometimes you have a nice little farm store and you want eye candy. You want those layers to be out there in this cool looking coop that kind of identifies as your farm, and that's the pictures everybody takes of themselves at your farm and they post out there for your marketing. That is, of course, that's a valid reason, but you still need to do them right. I mean, don't just have those layers just kind of not really doing anything for you. Wholesale. If you have a huge operation, obviously wholesale might be the way to go. Personally, you know, we started off as a small farm and we've become a bigger farm, a much bigger farm. But we've stayed, no matter what people said to me, we stayed in that retail space. We want the biggest bang for our buck. We don't want all of our efforts and energy spent on this to be the benefit of the wholesaler who then is going to turn your product into gold. That should be yours. And you can't really, well, you can. The repetitious sales cycle of eggs. People like to get them every week. If you have a beef operation, a pork operation, or whatever, they're not going to just buy pork occasionally or weekly from you. But if you have eggs to offer them, they're going to be like, you know what? I need a couple dozen eggs. Oh, and I love to get those ribeyes because they look really nice. Okay, that's kind of how eggs works for our farm. It's that product. The minute I run out of eggs inventory on my farm, my order volume just goes off a cliff. I'm like, guys, what's going on? You know, so eggs are directly tied to my repetitious sales cycle and are very key, especially if you're a direct retail operation to drive sales. All right, so the nitty is in the gritty. There's a lot of things you got to consider about layers. Obviously, I operate in a much smaller footprint than most of you guys. I've heard numbers over 70,000 acres and, I mean, just crazy, mind-numbing amounts of land. Where would you put a bunch of layers on that much land? If you have finishing paddocks, that'd probably be a good place to start. You know, let's get those sugar levels, let's get the nutrient density of those paddocks up even further with this nutrient cycle. Climate concerns. Wow, am I a fish out of water here today? Floridian in this Colorado snow. I may not have a lot of advice about snow or cold, but definitely layers can handle it. You just got to be able to build your solutions and your infrastructure around what your climates are. No farm is alike. Your solutions will all be different. They'll look different. Soil type and capacity. I have huge capacity for nutrients just because of my soil base of sand. However, that capacity obviously with time changes because as I build more organic matter, it takes less nutrient input to get the effect that I need. So ultimately, I can utilize more and more land that way. All right, next is unwashed versus washed eggs. What are your local rules? That's something you need to think about. Again, don't raise the product and then don't know how to get that product to market. You know, there's nothing worse than having buckets and buckets of eggs going to pigs or whatever you got on your farm to feed them to because you don't have all that thought out. So don't just go get your layers yet. Think about it. In my case, we were able to do unwashed eggs. It's beautiful. I haven't washed an egg in 15 years. All my eggs, I mean, I have One of my kids runs our entire egg operation. We have 2,000 layers. It only takes her a couple hours a day to handle all that. That's very minimal male power. We have the benefit of pet food laws in Florida, so we could just sell them as pet food. You may not have that option in your state, or they may have an option for unwashed eggs. If you have to wash eggs, it's not the end of the world, but you want to make sure you build your operation around that. There's great egg washing equipment out there, but it adds, a level of detail to if you want to ship eggs or if you're delivering eggs, you got to keep them cold. There's a lot of things that go along with that. Unwashed eggs are beautiful. I feel like that's what people want. A lot of people really want unwashed eggs that can sit on the counter. Know who your end customer is. That's also super important. If you already have a vibrant business and you're selling a lot of meat, this literally will just turbocharge the products that your customers will buy. They're going to love having this option. All right, let's talk about coop designs. On our farm, we use wheeled egg mobiles. Our designs are super simple, but they're very rugged and they work very well. I use a lot of angles and triangles in my designs just for rigidity. We have gone through countless hurricanes. That's a problem that I have to deal with in my region. I don't know what your problems are, but that is one for me. And so I build my coops to withstand a lot. In my particular case, we just got done with Helene, and all of our coops, every one of them survived the 125-hour winds that we received. You just got to think about the way you build, think about your environment. Are you dealing with snow loads? Are you dealing with mud seasons? What do you have to deal with? Are you going to have to put your poultries into winter housing, based on your seasons? I'm fortunate I don't have to do that. So an egg mobile is what I chose. If I was going to be following cattle and on large open ranges, again, an egg mobile would be ideal for that because you want your layers out on the ground, sanitizing and going after manure piles, integrating that with your soil. That is where a coop like this is ideal. In my case, even though we're following cattle, but we also have paddock designs. Now sometimes the problem with this coop is a lot of people will set up a nice big paddock and they'll put the coop in the paddock, and guess what? They'll leave it there for like 7 days, but they give them this great big paddock. Well, layers on chickens alike, most of their defecation is right there within the footprint of the coop. So even though they may have been in this nice big area, beautiful area for 7 days, they're not going to utilize it. All the nutrients are going to be right there in that footprint with your feeders and whatnot. So in our case, if we set up a paddock, we'll start our coop at one side of the paddock, and every day we literally just leave the paddock there, move the layers, move them up, move all the feeders. This way you spread out the nutrient loads. This allows me to simulate the traditional meat bird shelter design where you bring the shelters through fields. You can control that manure distribution. This works really well with that. Birds are prey animal. They don't want to go out. I mean, you see these beautiful pictures of them out in the fields. They don't do that by instinct. They're jungle fowl. They want to stay in the cover of things. They want to stay under the coop. They want to stay under trees. They want to stay protected. And so you gotta, so that's why I like to move them through paddocks. And so this is, a great opportunity, again, just for your design and thinking of what you need. So that is what I do to kind of solve the manure distribution and nutrient loads. Absolutely. So I probably should have not glazed over that. So roost space, feed and water access, no bully doors. Okay, so she asked that question. That's a great question. So how many here have layers on their farm right now? Awesome. Okay. So how many here raise pullets and then home them to their coops? Like, so when you know what I'm talking about? When your layers are ready to go from the brooder into your coops and you're going to home them into your coops. How often do you spend night after night picking up those layers and putting them in the coop? Does that apply to anybody here? Okay. So that's a very frustrating thing. What I have found is layers like to take ownership of space. There's kind of like that dominance thing going on there. And so I create multiple doors along my coops. I mean, I probably have 100 foot of linear door space on my coops, so that way they can hop in anywhere. One big fat hen can't just sit there in a door and say, "You're not coming in." That's not going to happen in one of that coop design, and that's actually helps, very much on our homing with our coops. So now we actually have it to where we might home 500, 600, 700 layers in a coop. That first night, which is always the worst night, on average, I might have 5 out, 10 out, and that's just because, we're looking at the hens and observing them. Roost space is also very important. You want to make sure that you have at least a few inches of space per hen. So when I design my coops like I do, I make sure there's plenty of space for those guys to roost. Some like to roost in the rafters, some like to roost on the roost that I provided, on my nest boxes, on my feeders. It just doesn't matter. And it's also important to have feed and water in there too, because these guys are up and running way before you're going to get to them to service them in the morning. And if you want your hens to lay in a manageable amount of time for you, if you want them to lay in the morning and such, you want them to have access to feed and water right away, way before you're there. So remnant, leftover feed from the previous day and feeders in there, they'll start eating, but most importantly, water. Water is the biggest thing for layers. If you don't have water, you have nothing. I mean, 24 hours without water, it'll take you 30 days to recover that lost egg production in a layer. You can go bad quick. All right, here's another coop design. This is my friends, 3 brothers in Wisconsin, and they have large open fields, right? And they actually share these fields with their sheep that they run through them. And their solution was large poultry schooners that they move every day, okay? And so if you have very large field space and you're uber concerned about like predation and having big open areas, this is a good design for that. And this helps, again, with your manure distribution. This is why I move my coops through the paddocks. Even if I have a paddock in one spot for 7, 10 days, whatever, I'm always moving my hens through that paddock each day. So I want to move that manure around. I want to replicate what this creates, what this particular style. And again, this is great for flat terrain, but if you're in rocky terrain or you're in, odd terrain, the wheeled approach might be the way you'd have to go. H2O, guys, like I said before, you have to have good water for your layers. Air, water, feed, in that order. They love flowing water if you can do it. If you can't, that's okay. Just make sure it's good, clean water, and cool if it's hot. But they love flowing water. All my coops, I'm so lucky to be able to do this. I can overflow water in all my coops. I love water going on the ground all over the place. It's there's so many things that benefit from that. The layers love it. But this is something that once I started doing flowing water, it made a huge difference in my layers. Feed performance. Okay, so most folks will instantly think when something goes wrong, it must be the feed. I can tell you 90% of the time it's management. And for that reason, you want to have a good nutritionist at your side. So don't just buy any feed. Buy feed that you know is made well, by people that pay attention to all the nutrient analysis that your layers will need. Believe it or not, layers cannot exist on just grass. They don't have the gut bacteria and enzymes to digest lignin like a cow. All right, they have a gizzard with rocks, that's their stomach, and they can chew up all sorts of things, grains, insects. They can get, maybe on really awesome forage, they might be able to get 15 to 20% of their diet out that. But that's it. So don't think that you can change that scale. It's just not the way that bird was built. They, again, are jungle fowl. They want easy leaf litter targets, seeds, insects. That's their native food sources. Okay, so feed issues are super important. We had a year where our lay rates literally dropped to 10%, which is crazy. I mean, if you have layers, that's catastrophic. I looked at everything. I even had my nutritionist out, and we were all baffled as what was going on. I did feed analysis. I was like, what's going on? Salt. Just salt was the problem. There was not in a ton of feed on average you need about 7 to 8 pounds of salt in that ton of feed to give layers the proper salt intake for their diet. Without that, it's amazing what it will do to them. And so just that one thing. But all my tests did not include salt. It was just feed protein analysis, energy levels, just trying to understand. But I overcomplicated it. So we fixed that. When I go back to management, feeder space is super important. I have a friend in Puerto Rico, Pedro, he farms. Puerto Rico has a huge layer operation. I was at an APA conference, I was coming back, and he called me, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? He goes, man, I have a big problem. I have thousands of layers, and I'm only getting like a 30% lay rate, because I don't know what's changed. I think it's my feed. So really, well, tell me more about your operation. Because, well, we did increase the number of layers we have quite a bit. We used to have 2,000, now we have 4,000 layers. I said, that's pretty interesting. Anything else change? He says, no. I said, well, I think I know what your problem is. Did you increase your feeder space? He did not. So I said, double it right now. Like, go out there and do something about it. Double your feed space. He calls me 30 days later and says, David, I'm at 90%. You got to make sure you're paying attention to all these things. Feeder space, roost space, water, there's so many little aspects. Guys, this is probably like drinking from a fire hose for you. Some of you maybe not, but a lot of you probably is. I don't want you to get mired down in all this. I'm just really trying to create a little bit of inspiration, or maybe, let's give layers a try. All right, harvesting your hen fruit. We use roll-away nest boxes. I highly recommend community nest boxes. This allows me to basically not have to touch any of my eggs. They come out clean. A lot of people, like to manage bedding and whatnot. It's certainly possible, but I would totally recommend that you stick with a community nest box, something that rolls the egg away from the hen. You kind of want to discourage them from making a nest of eggs because they get really difficult to clean, and it adds a lot of labor to what you do. And it also makes you not want to do it. Again, this is kind of important, when you think about it. Getting product to market is always a challenge. The other thing I want to mention is a lot of people get hens that get attached. It's not a good idea. Don't keep hens on the farm too long. And I don't say that because I'm not compassionate. I love my layers. But the problem is they become a disease vector as they get older. They develop really bad habits. They lay very large eggs. They become, less productive. And they also have a habit of teaching other hens the same thing. And so we have a very strict culling program. Lighting, again, this is something that depends on your environment. They're jungle fowl. They're used to being on the equator or in Asian jungles. This is something that you can do on your farm, but if you add lighting, make sure you add it in the morning. Don't add it at night. They don't like it when the lights go off at night. I'm kind of going long here, guys. I'm going to have to go through some of this. Predators, again, chickens are yummy, eggs are yummy. You have tons of predators. This is a problem that we have on our farm. We do have livestock guardian dogs. In the very bottom one, I do have a 10-year-old that loves to bring his little BB gun out. That helps. And teaching your livestock guardian dogs to be bird aware also helps a lot too. Habits. If anybody know Troy Bishop, he had a term that he used, linger graze. It's a really cool term. Hang out, watch your hens, watch what they do. This allows you to observe things as they go wrong, especially. When their habits change, things are changing. Something's wrong or not. The market opportunity here, and again, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go through this a little bit more quickly. If you want to take a picture of this. This was something that I kind of calculated. I like numbers. For every egg laid, I was providing the nutrients for forage growth for 2.6 square feet of pasture. So when someone gets a dozen eggs, that's a kind of a cool thing to be able to communicate to that individual. It's like, this is what you did. This is the real tangible thing that occurred when you bought these eggs. This is how much pasture I grew. Money and layers, last slide. can't not forget this. Each hen has the potential, if you do your job, of producing anywhere from $100 to $250 of gross annual revenue, okay? So it doesn't take a lot of layers to make a decent income, even if that's all you did. But I highly recommend you pair this with your operations, multiple levels of products on the same acreage. Double dip that acreage as much as you can. And pastured poultry is a great way to do that and introduce it to your farms. I've gone long, but I don't know if we have any time for questions or not, but if we do, okay, cool. I would love to answer some questions. Hey, guys.
Yeah, I think we can take maybe 2 questions. Start there.
Yeah, I only saw hens in those pens. I'm sure that you get some roosters. What do you do with them?
So because we raise a lot of products on our farm, we basically, if we have ever roosters, we'll grow them out. We harvest them for meat, and we actually have a pretty large segment of our customer base that loves older birds. And so we cull our flocks, and we sell them as stewing hens. And if we have roosters, they also can kind of fill the same role. So we try to use everything we can. So roosters as protection, if you didn't hear that. Roosters can develop issues in the flock because if you have, for an example, too many roosters, it actually can stress out your hens. And what's the first thing when you encounter stress in any body is the reproductive system shuts down. And so you lose egg-laying rates, and that happens, in any species. And so we do everything we can to reduce stress. You can have roosters in a flock. The eggs will be fertile in that case, and that can cause some issues, down the line. We used to do that in the beginning, but we've kind of gone away from that. Yeah.
I'm going to go right over here.
So, yeah, I noticed those weren't Cornish cross. How did you decide on that breed, and where do you get them?
So Cornish cross, as for meat birds, you mean? Okay. So guys, you can have a lot of your principles of why you do things kind of tied up in your decision process, like what you want. And a lot of people want to have a heritage meat bird, but the customer is not there yet. That's not what they want. And so as a farmer, you have to understand the room and understand who you're serving. And people got hooked on the Cornish cross because of its body conformation, larger breast size. We use those. They can be done very well in pasture, but they are a Lamborghini. They need the right kind of feed input, and they need to be managed very well. But we've been doing, we do a lot of flocks of meat birds that are heritage, that are longer grown, and we're starting to see more and more interest in that. But the Cornish cross, where to get them, there's a lot of hatcheries. My recommendation is get it as close as you can. Ideally, if there's a hatchery nearby, drive and get them. Don't put them in the mail. The ones that I get eggs from, so I have a hatchery that's right across the border from me in Georgia. And so I can literally, they're an hour away, which is awesome. So I get them literally the same day of hatch. Yeah.
All right. I think there are a lot of questions in the audience. I have one virtually, and then I'm wondering if you would be willing to hang out and we can send folks to break, and the folks who are super interested in questions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Perhaps they can stick around. The question is about do you have a perception about minimum flock size needed for a profitable egg operation?
Minimum flock size needed for a profitable egg operation. So it really comes down to this. When we all farm, we decide how much income we might need. And so there's, in my opinion, no minimum size depending upon what your income needs are. Chickens do great in flocks. It's best not just to have a couple. I would say have at least a flock of 10, 20, or 30. But ideally, you're going to find your best return when you get into flocks of 500 to 1,000, because you think about how much time you're spending servicing different groups, and your time worth to go get eggs and bring them back, package them, so there's kind of a delta there, but it really depends on like what your goal is and how much, and what your income requirement, or if it's not that. I mean, if it's the eye candy aspect of it, then it's a different thing, right? It has a different value to you. So you could have a smaller flock and it's okay. So it's highly based on each farm.
Great. So, okay, what I'm going to do now is, I think that there was like 6 other hands in the audience. If you want to keep talking chickens, you can hang out. If you're ready for a break, please feel free to get up and go take a break. And if you want to have more conversation and questions for maybe like 10 more minutes or something,
Yep, that's fine.
come down here and we will ask Dave a few more questions. Round of applause.
Thank you, guys.
And while we're shuffling, Dave, I'm going to ask you a couple others from our online audience. So how stressful is it for layers to be producing year-round using lights? Does this decrease the nutrition in the eggs or shorten their lifespans?
So how stressful is it for using lights year-round? So there's a couple angles of thought here. A layer obviously uses light to kind of regulate its lay rates.
Hang on one second. Yeah. If you all are leaving to a break, please be quiet so we can keep answering questions. And if you want to keep talking, please take it out to the hall. Thanks.
Yeah. So, but the stress variable there with year-round laying is kind of mitigated by the fact that if you're culling them at the right times, they're not going to be laying like beyond a molt, or at least going into a molt. And so in our case, we raise layers twice a year. We raise them, like we'll start a flock in December, and then we'll start a flock in late spring, and with the goals of bringing layers into lay at different times of the year. Some of them need light stimulation, some of them don't. But I find if your climate is good and it's not too cold, that the light stimulation doesn't seem to bother them. In fact, it improves lay rates. But it needs to be used right. Like I said in the presentation, make sure you add light stimulation in the morning hours going into sun, not at night.
Great, thank you. Okay, who else in the audience up here had a question? Oh.
I kind of have a follow-up question to, I think, a question before, which was, if you're thinking about, say, the 500 to, and up of hens, I was curious if you want to then divide them into different little communities, and if so, like how many would you have in that, or would you keep them all together?
So the manpower benefit is to keep them together, and the hens don't suffer from that. I mean, animal wellness and welfare to me is hugely important in my decision process, and because of that, so once you understand that the welfare is not a problem, then you got to look at manpower, and so it's better to be in a position where you could have less of it. So you could divide them up, like if you have a farm and you want to have layers in different areas because you have a reason for it. If you need the disturbance pattern, or if you need the diversity, that's something you could totally do. But it just makes sure you weigh in, okay, I got to service this coop and then this coop and that coop versus just the one.
Okay, so one of my questions is, do you ever do any other supplemental feed like whey or veggie scraps or anything like that for your birds? The other question is, do you guys ever struggle with mites? Like, we have mites in some of our wooden coops that have like burrowed into the wood. We found that to be an issue. So do you ever come across that, and what are your strategies to manage those issues?
Okay, so those are great questions, actually. One question about mites. Okay, so in supplemental feed options, if you have access to supplemental feed options that are not formulated, the only thing you got to do is actually do a nutritional analysis of the ingredients you're going to use, so you can see how that fits into your other supplements, right? So if you're only getting 12%, say, out of the spent grains, you got to get your formulation closer to 17%. That layer hen needs enough protein to make an egg, okay? And so it's really important, this is where the science comes in, is that you understand what the full analysis of what you're feeding them is, and that they're getting what they need. And so the answer to that is yes, but I say that cautiously just to make sure you know what it is that they're actually getting. And mice definitely are a problem, wood for sure. That's why I like the community nest boxes. We use, they have, instead of matting, instead of like bedding material, they have mats where they lay their eggs, and the nest boxes themselves are metal, and so it doesn't create a habitat for mites. But if you do have a mite problem, take wood ash, diatomaceous earth, and you mix that together into pans, and you put that out in your pasture, or near the coops or in the coops, and they'll dust bathe in that. Okay, and that's a great, and they like that. That's a great way for them to kind of self-medicate, even though you're not medicating them. It's just DE and wood ash, but it will help kill mites. Yeah.
All right, let's take one more question from the live audience, and then I've got another virtual question.
Okay.
Okay. So we're on like the North Carolina, South Carolina line in a weird spot in between like the mountains and the foothills. And we really thought about this behind our cattle a few years ago because our friends do it in South Carolina, but it's totally flat. So is the Weald, like we have terraces all over, which makes it extremely difficult to pull things.
Right.
And our other thing was aerial predators. We manage for birds and we have a lot of raptors, which is awesome, but I guess what would you recommend is the best thing for that kind of area for housing and predation from aerial predators?
If you're dealing with rough terrain and terraces, obviously Weald is probably the way you would have to go. And so you build kind of based on that. You want to have lower structures, not tall structures, so you have your center of balance low enough. If you're traversing, uneven ground. And so I think you could totally build something for it, as long as you have like a tractor that you can put in low gear and kind of keep it going nice and slow where you're trying to go. Because, you don't want to like bounce the hens around all over the place. They're pretty cool about being moved. It's first few times they get a little wackadoo, but, after that they get used to it. They're like, oh, we're going to new pasture, so they kind of know what the program's all about. Aerial predation, this is why I do like any coop that's wheeled off the ground gives them a natural place to run. Okay, so they're going to run under the coop if they see aerial predators, but that's also why it's important that you have food and water in the coop. So if they're scared and they're going to go into shelter or safety from an aerial predator, they still can eat, and they can still drink. And so that's really important that you provide those options for the birds. So, consider all those things when you're like planning this out. And then you could probably even build like little shade structures over your feeders and your waterers that also would provide a similar type of aerial protection. Because like the first thing the hen does is like when there's birds of prey around is they stop eating. And then they stop eating, they stop making eggs, and then you're like down that path. And so, but the more options you can give them to seek safety and still get food and water, it will overcome a lot of that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So just something I've been a little bit curious about. I'm a cattleman, and we just have a little, kind of home flock of a few birds, But I've gotten curious about, in regenerative agriculture, in cattle we talk about conception to plate, And with the birds, I've wondered about that whole part of so you buy your chicks. But what about that part prior to that and the sustainability of it? And where's the genetics going in the country, around chickens being able to reproduce themselves? I've just wondered what the answers are to that.
Excellent question. It's a very good question. So the solution does not present itself right away. We have to change what people want in their food. We have to change that they prefer a big Cornish cross juicy breast to a heritage bred meat bird. You know, we have to change the idea that like say hybrid layers, we do use a lot of hybrid style layers, the Sexling for an example. We use those because, you know, again, we're trying to have something that has ideal production and ideal lay rates for the time that you have them on pasture. And so, to a degree, that's where we're at with as an industry, right? We still depend on some of the things that break our chain of sustainability. But the solution doesn't mean it ends there. The solution ultimately is a longer-term conversation of rebreeding and regaining the genetic potential that we did have originally in meat birds. Cornish cross is a new thing. You know, it hasn't been around, it's been around maybe since the 60s, I think it was, 60s, 70s. I mean, you know, Kentucky Fried Chicken used a Delaware as their meat bird for a long time. And so that was a true breed, sustainable flock that you could maintain. They were dual purpose. They could lay eggs and become a meat bird. And so in my eyes, that's the ideal situation. That's the best situation, is to have that truly sustainable breeding process occurring on farm. And so I think that is something that will happen in time. We're just not there yet, you know, but we will get there. And that's why it's important that people embark on this journey of pasture poultry so we can get there.
Okay, I'm going to wrap with one question from our online audience. And online audience, thank you for all the wonderful questions. I'm sorry that we don't have time for all of them. The question is, what resource or resources do you point new producers to who are raising layers? It sounds like maybe this is coming from a technical service provider who really wants to have good resources to point producers to who they're working with.
So the answer to that question is real simple. APA, American Pastured Poultry Producers Association, is something you should all write down. If you're seriously thinking about pastured poultry, they have a lot of information, a lot of content by producers such as myself that populates that information. Everything from coop designs to brooder designs to you know, to where to source feed and animals, and they have great discussion forums where there's a lot of us farmers that answer these questions within that organization. But APA will become your right-hand solution to that. And it's something that I highly recommend you do before you even start a flock. Go on there and just start reading.
David, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Round of applause for those of you
Thank you,
who've
guys.
stuck around. Thanks for answering a few additional questions. Really appreciate it. It's nice to have diverse livestock presentations here at the conference.